So life, it's full of tradition, and that applies to the car world as well. There's the introduction of the new car, and then 3 to 4 years down the road, there's something called a mid-cycle refresh, and that's basically a nip and tuck. But what happens when the car you introduced 3 or 4 years ago still sells ridiculously well and you can't build enough? Do you still go forward with the nip and tuck? Well, the answer apparently is yes in the world of Telluride, Colorado, or in this case, Kia. Okay, so there are a number of changes we have to go through, but let's start with the one thing that hasn't changed, and that is the 3.8 Atkinson cycle V6, 291 horsepower, 262 pound-feet of torque, mainly driving the front wheels. We'll get to more of that later. Then we need to go to the stuff that really is probably the biggest change here, and they're trying to make this more, I think, for lack of a better term, more Subaru-esque, and that's with the introduction of 2 different models. So there's the basic ones and there's the fancy ones we've seen previously, and then there's going to be an X-Line and an X-Pro. What you are looking at is an X-Pro, and the idea is to make it look more rugged. So in the X-Line, think of that as like the introduction to more of going to the trailhead. That raises the ride height 10 mils. It changes the traction control system and also changes some of the towing. But then going to the X-Pro, that changes the wheels. So notice they're smaller, they're 18-inch wheels with more of an off-road tire, but most importantly, it ups the towing from 5,000, which was the case in the previous Telluride, to 5,500. Then you gotta focus on the way it looks, which I don't think this really needed to change because this was one of the big reasons why this vehicle sold so well. It was something that was attractive, like an Audi Q7, but it wasn't $75,000. So why really mess with success? In here, they tweak things. This is the nip and tuck. Like, take a look at the front. They've changed the grille. They've made the lights more vertical. And if you look towards the roof of the car, they've changed the roof rails on the off-road models. That nip and tuck, of course, extends to the rear end of the vehicle. Yes, the taillights, but more in the bling department. And here we need to have a very short discussion about the size of the Kia logo these days. They've changed it in the past year or so. And here I just feel it's out of place. This is all about understatement. It's something that is equivalent to an Audi, if I'm honest. So why have this really big logo, especially when it has such a wonderful name? It evokes skiing in the Rocky Mountains. So let's just focus on the Telluride, not so much the Kia. Then there's some changes down here with the bumper, and of course the focus on towing for this X-Pro model. Now there are some changes to the color, like this one here is a blue. It's flat, not so much that it's flat in terms of tactile feel, flat, not metallic, and it really stands out with some of the trim changes in the X-Pro and the X-Line. Now there's some other changes we need to discuss, but there we need to move. The changes extend to the inside as well, and here not really a surprise considering the design element we saw in the EV6 is starting to cascade its way throughout the Kia lineup. We saw it in the Sportage, and of course we see it here, and that is the single-piece curved dash. It's not really a single screen, it's 2 screens, 12.3-inch screens, but here it kind of looks like the Kia EV6, at least at the top. But the good news is they did not take the haptic feedback controller that we saw in the Sportage and the EV6. Here they've stuck with real buttons like we saw in the original Telluride, which work incredibly well. Now, speaking of the buttons, what does it control? We already talked about the all-wheel drive system changed a little bit. They optimized the traction control system. Well, in practice, it can send up to 50% of the torque to the rear wheels, kind of like the previous one, but this now has 4 different drive modes. The overall tactile feel is unusually good, specifically the headliner here, although I'd like to see that extended all the way down to the A-pillar. The coloring here, not great with the blue. I'd like to see some more of like a tan or a saddle. That would really make the color here pop, especially with some of the other colors that they're trying to make this off-road idea, I don't want to say pastel, but more look at me rather than be understated. And with that, we do need to discuss something that should have been changed. And so we arrive at the point where we must have a come to Jesus discussion. If I am honest, this is not really my cup of tea because I am not a practical human being, but most people are, and that is why this has been an unequivocal rock star in the crossover world. Not just because it's practical, attractive, and I know this sounds very strange coming from a Dave Ramsey guy, it's not a lot of money. So really they didn't need a lot of changes here, except for one, and this is where we get to the wish list. This is wonderful to drive around town. However, what it needs is some of the electrification we've seen in other Kias that has worked incredibly well. Like we just drove that Sportage hybrid, and I don't want to get into the dollars and cents of that in this episode, but that's like 26, 27 grand for a proper crossover with electrification that does pretty good at the pump and is actually better to drive than the gas vehicle. If we can take some of that logic and apply it here in something that is much more attractive and frankly has a lot more space, I think that would go a long way in an already successful vehicle. But I am one man, and this is the point of the episode where I turn this around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I do want to leave you with one thing by asking my guest host, my frequent guest host, Mr. Brian Max. He is me in Canada with much less hair, but he knows more about vehicles like this because he lives in a place with weather and I don't.
And I use something like this every summer.
Also in the winter.
And well, definitely in the winter, but in the summer, this is absolutely perfect for me. It tows what I need it to tow and it goes where I need it to go.
So he looks like a skate rat right now, but he's more of a snowboarding guy. So you're gonna do your own episode on this car.
That's right.
And you're gonna give your Canadian pitch on this whole thing.
Something like that.
Okay, so go check out his channel. How can they find you?
Brian Max on YouTube, links here, links below.
Okay, until we see you in the next episode, bis später.